community groups to help bridge communication gaps and make intercultural connections. She has worked in human resources and speaks 3 languages. Today we get to expand our knowledge of Chinese food with her presentation, Soup, Egg Roll, Stir Fry, and Fried Rice. Yvonne?
Thank you very much, Debbie. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be reinvited, and I just enjoy the conversation you were having with each other. It's wonderful to be in somewhere warmer. You're sitting outside. That's wonderful, and we could do that too. And in the Tuscany, a beautiful, beautiful places to be. Well, today I want to start by giving you a warning. This presentation will make you very hungry for Chinese food. I started doing this presentation because what is the easier way to get to Chinese culture? Everybody likes to eat Chinese food. So, and I think this is a wonderful starting point for our cross-cultural conversation. I'm going to share my screen. Just one moment. I guess it was open and then went somewhere else. So now it is ready. There. So this is a program that's titled Soup, Egg Roll, Stir Fry, and Fried Rice. Just make sure you're at the correct program. This is an introduction to Chinese food. I step out of my role as a corporate consultant right now because usually when I work with business executives that are going to China or East Asia or be hosting Chinese or East Asian partners here, they will be eating a meal in a banquet style setting. And just like American culture, we have dining etiquette. In the Western culture, there is dining etiquette for the whole Chinese banquet style dining. So before we can get to that level, I think the starting point with Chinese food is something we can all relate to. So what features makes it Chinese? Like when you go to a Chinese takeout place, which is a lot right now, a lot of takeouts rather than dine-in, what features makes it Chinese? What is the order of appearance, I call it, order appearance like in a movie of your dishes? And what does that mean? And how do the Chinese see our food? And lastly, what do some Chinese food mean? Now, there are some books about this, not a lot, I wouldn't say many, but the food is definitely an intriguing area all by itself. This is a very introductory presentation. So there's a whole world of Chinese food that deserves its own presentations. If you're interested, in the end, I will refer you to one of these books that might be interesting to you if you want to learn more. So what features makes it Chinese? So I'm going to start with the soup, egg roll, stir fry, and fried rice. We'll start from these points. Many times, the soup that you order from a Chinese dine-in or takeout place, it will look like that sweet, that's hot and sour, or some kind of, let's see, what else is a favorite? Maybe the, let's see, hot and sour, and then the maybe corn soup. And so these soups are usually clear. Okay, maybe you have had like a more creamier style, but the Chinese soup in general are a clear soup. Now, just to start from that point, some people might say, "What do you mean? Like, isn't there a creamy version too? Or they taste kind of creamy?" Well, the population in Asia, there is about 80 to 90% of the population where the adults are lactose intolerant. So that means that creamy soup is not a tradition in East Asia. That is more of a Western tradition where you have cream of any vegetable, you name it, right? So first of all, the soup, if you're looking for East Asian or Chinese soup, is very likely to be just a bone broth, which is a clear soup. Now, and then now you see there's a spoon there, and I will try to sometimes stop the sharing so you can see what I have here. And then we have the spoon is a Chinese style spoon. Now, I don't know if you used this before, but these spoons are usually made out of ceramic. And the advantage is that has anyone ever had soup and burned by the spoon? Not necessarily the soup itself, but the metal spoon burned your lip. Anybody had that experience? Well, with a Chinese spoon, the ceramic Chinese spoon, you're never burned by the spoon. So the content could be still hot and it won't bother you from trying to approach a hot item when the vessel itself does not burn you. So this is a kind of the Chinese version of the soup spoon. Now this spoon many times is not necessarily absolutely always on the table, because Chinese can pick up a soup without spoons and just drink from the bowl. And I'll show you how that could work too. And then what makes what makes it delicious, right? Sometimes we think of egg rolls like these that you see are small or tiny. They're also called spring rolls. So what's the difference with these names? Well, in Chinese, it actually comes from spring rolls because it was almost only eaten during the spring festival. It's not eaten all year round like has been in America. But the reason why it's called spring rolls is because inside, when you break into an egg roll, you can taste some of the vegetables that's the scent of spring. So the idea is that you're biting into the coming season, the spring scent of new grass, new vegetation, not all the dried out stuff we have to rehydrate, none of all those winter vegetables. So that's where spring rolls come from, the title. And then what makes them delicious? Sometimes we say it's crunchy on the outside, but inside is soft. So we got two textures going on there. And then stir fries. Stir fries is broccoli and beef. This is a typical example. But many times you'll see stir fry is some kind of vegetable versus some kind of meat. So you can change that. You can say, oh, I don't eat pork. Let's say, right, we can go with chicken. So we can have the stir fry, whatever it was, with chicken instead of the pork. Now, pork is a default meat in the Chinese world. Generally, most dishes are made with pork. But my father actually came from a region in northern China that really favors lamb, which is about like 90% of Chinese people don't eat lamb. So we always think that there's some heritage, some hidden heritage we probably have. And of course, recently, I think 3 years ago, I had a Ancestry.com DNA testing, and they found out that I have something like a 4% from Persia. So we don't know what that means, but we can pretty much count up the generations that was somewhere before my generation or two before my grandfather. So there you go. There's different preferences for the kind of meats, depend on the heritage and different tribes that are living in China. Now, and then we have a stir fry. We see this is just a completely vegetable. You can have a without meat, but even the vegetables have a certain kind of order. You see how they're cut. There's a certain size. And so what are the features, right, that makes it Chinese food? Like you see it, you know, oh, this is Chinese. So here we have the fried rice, which I'm also bringing out that fried rice that's done correctly, the rice is not stuck together. They are falling apart. They're just like one of the other pieces that you may have peas, you have shrimp, you have all, little bit of meat, and the meat is not the main focus. You see how the meat is just kind of decorations. So whatever you order a chicken fried rice and some and then this is what was often complained that Chinese restaurants get is like there's not enough chicken in my chicken fried rice. Well, that in itself is a cultural expectation. Now Chinese use the meat in chicken fried rice, shrimp fried rice. They are to flavor the rice, not necessarily you're eating a fried rice for the chicken. So this kind of the presence or where we put the meat, not as a dominant, the focus, the center, rather sometimes as a side, like a decoration or even just to get the flavor of it, that is a cultural expectation. So why is it? Why is that? So I just showed you some of the features that they're small, they have a half and half. Beef and broccoli is supposed to be half and half. It's not this, the more beef than broccoli. So this reason we can look into it more as we look at the order of appearance. Now, when we serve Chinese food in American style, they come in many times single portion or on a one plate where the things are one by one. Recently in the about 3 years ago, I came across a book, and it's about Victorian foods and Victorian dining. It was just something on the shelf in Glenview Library. I thought this is interesting. I did not know it would tell me so much about the way food is served now and how Chinese food becomes served the way it is in the United States. When my family and I came to the United States when I was 8, my parents also thought, when we go to the Chinese restaurants, they, wow, the soup comes first. I wonder, do we miss something? Because soup in the Chinese style dining comes way in the end. For us, it was a bit of that cultural shock or cultural adjustment that I thought we're having Chinese food. Why is the soup already here? Did we miss something? So that in itself is something that we still kind of get used to. So let's talk about that. So why does the soup come first? So the soup comes first, right? And then you get appetizer, and then you get the main course, which is stir fry or fried rice, and then or together, and then you have a dessert, and it's served individually and it appears on your plate altogether. So I have a picture here just to show you how that appears to you, and if it looks familiar, and that's why I want to make sure we're on the same page about this, right? And if it doesn't look familiar, maybe you're used to the soup showing up first and then the other dishes come later. Well, this is a Victorian order of how the courses appear. The Victorian order also includes like the salad if it's not soup, because salad and soup were by season. When it wasn't possible to get lettuce, it would be soup. And then when spring comes, when there's lettuce available, then that salad would take its place. Well, Chinese food doesn't have a lot of raw vegetables. This is probably from a irrigation method that didn't find it safe to eat the vegetables raw. So if you ever have Chinese salad or Chinese chicken salad, that's sort of like American creation. Chinese may have a lot of pickled vegetables or even like blanched or stir fry, but sort of this salad tradition is definitely not very traditionally Chinese. And then we can see that this is all on one plate, so it's individually served. While in Chinese food, we serve it in a family style because the culture is very, very much collective culture, and we socialize in that collective unit. So let me show you what Chinese food will look like in what I grow up with and which is called family style. And you might have heard this in about Italian food that's always served in family style. Well, Chinese food is always served in family style. We never had individual orders to our plate. And in my growing up, we always took from the middle, and then you serve that part for yourself. So the appetizer come first, and then there's the main course, and then there's the soup that will be part of that. That will be on the table. And then the dessert. Now, dessert, I put an asterisk because dessert is relative. Chinese doesn't always have dessert on every meal. And maybe that's why you've been to Chinese restaurants where there's cut oranges, sliced fruit, and that often take place of the dessert course. And then the soup often comes in the last because the soup is supposed to round off your meal and kind of washes everything down. So that's how the order of the courses would appear. Now, in a typical, I guess a typical family dinner for 4 people, the dishes would be about 4 and maybe 5. But if you have a special occasion, that's where we have heard of maybe 10 courses or 12 courses. But they would generally appear on the table all together for your selection. And I grew up with different type of dining etiquette, and that means that even if you see a dish that you really, really like, the chicken and the cashew, you have to take everything with it. You can't just pick out what you want. And I still have to teach my children that here. And then also, when you have a dish that is one big dish and there's 4 of you, we're taught that when we take our serving, we think about how many other people are at the table with us. Who else? How many are also dining with us? And we take that fraction or that proportion out. So think of every dish you see on the table as a pizza, and you're just taking your little wedge to your personal serving. So now, how do the Chinese see our food? Okay, so I just gave you a little glimpse of that. When we see that family style dining, we're taking that one wedge of our pizza, and we're also taught not to reach over to somebody else's invisible wedge. We have to stay on our wedge. So that's how we would eat and serve ourselves. And many times this is at home, then we serve ourselves. But if we're dining with someone else, if we're guests, then you wait for the host to serve you so that you don't seem too eager and you don't seem like you're just eating them out of house and home. So there's a lot of rules in our culture that kind of restrain us from being too, let's just say, too expressive. Okay, so now how do I see our foods? Now this is going to get to a section where you probably didn't expect, is that I'm going to talk about the yin and yang in Chinese food. Now, anyone heard of yin and yang before? Maybe you heard it as yin and yang, but in Mandarin it's pronounced yin and yang. And they are 2 energies which we see our culture is pervasive in everything we do. What we see when we are inside, outside, what we see on a person, there's a yin and yang side. So now what does eating have to do with yin and yang order? Okay, so this yin and yang principle and the philosophy, or I guess the way to see life, is from Taoism. Maybe you have heard of Taoism. T or D, it's the same thing. And the idea is a very, very old thinking of way to see the world in its natural universe. It's very prehistoric, Paleolithic, Neolithic. Just think of that's very, very old, thousands of years old. In Taoism, they say maybe 8,000 years old, and is from an oral tradition that could be even older. So think like Cro-Magnon people. So they observed the world very much. They observed that the sun always rises from the east and sets on the west. And they see the sun and the moon as 2 energies. And the heat is the sun, and the moon is the cold energy. So yin and yang, those words, yin actually means shadow, and yang means the sun and the shadow. and they always must occur, right? Nothing has no shadow. Even any vampire, yeah, fanatics out there. Okay, so ghosts, yeah, have no shadow, so that's not a good thing. So we're talking about the sun and the moon, heat and cold. Now, you see that one picture I have is the moon and the sun together. Now this is it's based on old observation, right? Pre scientific age. So that means that before we really know how far, right, we are from the sun or the moon. So in the olden days, like before telescope, they saw the sun and the moon as the same size. Now we know now that the sun is far, far, far greater than Earth, and the moon is smaller than the Earth. But back then, based on our naked eye, people thought they were the same. When we see that eclipse, right, the lunar eclipse and solar eclipse, they block each other exactly. So this idea that they're the same size or the same equal in energy is pre-science. Okay, so pre-scientific age. So these two energies are always at play. So what it does it have to do with eating is that the food is seen as having these two energies. So that means in Chinese world, meat is considered yang energy, vegetables is considered yin energy. They're based on the caloric content or how much calories they provide to us consumers. So here is a good image for you to see that the green, the vegetable, is yin, and then the yang, the meat, is the brown part, and that makes it a balance of the energies. And this idea that high caloric meat is the yang energy, and then the yin energy is low caloric. So you can see that broccoli beef has this combination, and this combination of yin and yang makes it a Chinese dish. And then I have an example of a burger and fries. Okay, so I'm not saying that I don't enjoy burger and fries. I love it too. But when the burger and fries first came to Asia, it was very shocking. It has a cultural shock value to Asians too. There was a moment, right, when McDonald's landed in Taiwan, in China, in Hong Kong, in all these places. And it was fascination for the people there. Because here we have something that's clearly higher caloric, right? It doesn't have that balance of vegetables because if you count that tomato and lettuce, it's never going to outweigh the meat, right? So this meal in itself, even though it's very fascinating, very exciting, not every Chinese person would gravitate to it or eat it 3 times a day because there was something about it that wasn't that yin and yang balance. And if you ask me about the potatoes, yes, potatoes considered a yin food in that way. But once it's deep fried, its caloric content makes it a yang food. So that's why a typical meal like this, and Chinese people, I'm not saying that all Chinese people are so good at seeing the difference, but it's so much part of our subconscious that Chinese people just say, "Oh, yeah, I'll have that, but I can't have that again this week. It's just too much." You see, they are not thinking necessarily like, "Oh, we have to save our calories and we shouldn't eat like be unhealthy." No, the healthiness is not part of that calculation. They just see it and doesn't quite fit culturally to our balance of meat and vegetables. Another note on that is that for Chinese people, it has always been something that you on special occasions. Okay, we don't eat meat all the time and as much as is available in the United States. Well, just because traditionally Chinese culture has been quite poor. I'm not talking about the last 20 years, but I'm talking about thousands of years. These kind of traditions still carry through. So the idea of having meat every day, first of all, or having meat that's more than you eat vegetables, wow, crazy. And this choice that we have now, I mean, it's hard for Americans to understand that because we haven't, even on COVID, we haven't really have to ration our meat or ration any type of food per se. But in World War II, I know some people might remember that there was a ration, but ration was maybe in the canned meats, and the ration was not nearly to the point that you just couldn't find any. You just couldn't get any, even if you had money. Okay, so the Chinese, culture, Chinese culture, and the people have lived with a lot of not having meat, and so now to be able to have meat in every meal, that's cool. That's great. It's not the same view as the Western, especially American experience. So, for example, why is this meal isn't Chinese? Now, I love this kind of meal, and I make this kind of meal on Sundays. Right? Sometimes we do this, and but it's not Chinese. So I'm going to go through with you this sense of order or this sense of balance. So first, maybe you notice that it's a lot of meat, right? Wow, this is great, but it's not Chinese food. Well, first, I don't know if you can see me because sometimes people put me on the, so you can't pick it up with chopsticks, right? So all those finely chopped food that we saw, right, in the first few slides, soup, egg roll, stir fry, and fried rice, you can't really pick this up with our chopsticks, right? And then it's kind of dry from Chinese perspective. It doesn't, it's just a hunk of meat and you got potatoes, but there's no like sauce, or there's no balance of liquid and solids. So having soup, Chinese meals, having soup is part of that yin and balance with the solid, what is considered yang. So Chinese meals often includes a soup. And sometimes you say, oh, like my kids, they don't really like soup. They don't want soup. But then they say, oh, it comes with, you have to take it. You feel like, why do I have to take it? Can we just skip the soup? It confuses your Chinese host. For the Chinese meal, you have to have liquid balanced by solids. And this one, there's no balancing. And then I mentioned the size for utensils. And then the color is just brown and meat. The potato is potato color. Well, that doesn't have the color combination. Now, if you notice with broccoli and beef, two colors, and you have other kung pao chicken, you also have colors to balance it out. In fact, the Chinese typical meal, and I will explain this again later, but there's 5 colors, and there's red, white, black, green, and white. Okay, did I hope I got that. I'll show you later if I didn't. And then the texture. The texture is just kind of, well, meat texture is delicious, right? But the texture that I mentioned for the egg rolls, crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside, that is a yin yang relationship. So having something that has 2 textures, 2 flavors, that is a yin yang order. So what do some Chinese food mean? And I will show you some of these examples of how they appear and they work in a Chinese setting. So small meals versus large meals. So I'll start with this. The small meal is this one on the left is a first class. Yes, on a flight to Asia, okay, or when you can choose your meal, if you chose the Chinese or Asian meal, they will include the East Asian meal diet. They will include, you see, 3 dishes and a bowl of rice. The white is the rice, green for vegetables. You got the red or brown in the meat, and then you have another dish, the vegetable dish, to balance out these color and the texture. The you can see that the meat is one out of the four choices, because the meat is not supposed to dominate, because we all have to live with limitations. Now, even first class, this idea that you always have to curb, you can't eat all the meat you want, because there's a million a billion others that may not have this. So I think that that is very typical part of Chinese food rule, is that it's not like you can eat all you want. It's always someone else who may not have this, so we curb that. We always limit ourselves. The sense of balance, you see, and that fish on the left, it's probably has some spiciness, the red sauce, okay, and then the other vegetables would not have the spiciness, so that you would balance out your flavors as well. And then you see a right side would be a larger meal. The fish is bigger, and then you have the other meats, and then you're balanced out again with the vegetables. When it comes to meats, it's also when we have festivals and special days, then we have more. You see that the table is almost half meat. Well, this is a meal that my cousin sent me that they made for Chinese New Year. So this is a very special meal. So there you have that. But then a typical dining may be a type of omelet instead of real meat, as you see. And people like to ask, well, why is the fish head on? Geez, I don't want to eat anything that's staring at me, right? This isn't pleasant. Well, let me just say that in this yin and yang relationship, yin is also chopped up small pieces. Yang is when you can afford to your guest or your family a whole animal. And the most like efficient or most let's say affordable would be a fish with a whole animal. Now you might also feel like, gosh, yeah, but just I don't want to see that, right? The head and all that. Well, in a country where only recently, even now, there's sometimes the electricity or refrigeration is not stable. You want to see the head on the fish so you know it's fresh, and you want to know that it is leftover from someone who had eaten it or made it before, you see. This idea also that a fresh kill shrimp with the head on, you will have a fresher quality than the head without head. Okay, the shrimp without heads. So that's also why they show you that this is a whole animal that we got for you. Anyone been to a meal in China or somewhere that the chicken came with a head on? Anybody? Okay. But if you have, that's another example where the chicken head, well, yeah, they want to make sure that you know that you got a real chicken, that they didn't get some other fowl and pretended to be a chicken. So you get the whole animal. It's a sign of sincerity or integrity that this restaurant isn't just some, you know, do anything under the table. And Chinese fast food follow the same rules. So if you think that, oh, that's only in fancy restaurants and first class, well, there are Chinese, what we call Chinese cafeteria dining or Chinese fast food. Where I come from, Los Angeles, there's a whole area of these kind of cafeteria food, and which is like what you may see here as a buffet, but they will serve you, so you don't touch anything, and they will serve you, and you just choose the ones you want, like Panda Express. So Chinese fast food will have the yellow, okay, which is eggs, there, white for the rice, green vegetables, a soup in the middle, and then you have the top corner is a marinated tofu, and then you have tomatoes. So these green, yellow, white, orange, brown or black combination, you will see this repeated, and they adhere to this even in fast food. So they wouldn't feel like they're doing it right if they everything was brown. You see? And so this is just part of the principle of Chinese food. They're not trying to make things hard for themselves. They're not trying to save on the soup. So you see, the soup is part of that liquid versus solid, and you wash it down your meal, so you don't always have a soda, to go with your Chinese meal, because the soup has that function. And then people ask me this, so I'm going to answer some of these typical questions, but you're welcome to put in questions in the chat and I'll answer them later. Chinese combination. So is sweet and sour pork real Chinese food? People have asked me. Yes, it is. In fact, the sweet and sour is a yin and yang combination. So this idea that two flavors are going on is in a good sweet and sour, or actually freshly made sweet and sour pork would be crunchy slightly, and then you have the sticky sauce on top. And then two, okay, is gongbao chicken real Chinese food? Yes, it is. It is gongbao. We have a gongbao chicken. Gongbao is actually the title of an officer like an imperial officer, not like we're thinking of like military officer, but in the Chinese government system hundreds of years ago, there is a rank that's called Gongbao. And he liked his chicken with a little bit of peanuts. And so they named that spiciness food, that's flavor with peanuts and chicken together, chopped up together. They call it Gongbao chicken after him. So if you might have heard of General Cao's chicken, it's the same idea. It's just that they have borrowed this tradition in restaurants and foods, Chinese foods, you can see often has these names that are from Chinese origins. And then you can see in this picture, I'll show you in this picture, that you see everything is chopped up small. And then the vegetables that are in these mushrooms, right, broccoli, they are oftentimes the best substitute that we can find wherever we are. So do you know that Chinese food is very popular in Lima, Peru? There's hundreds, or I don't know, maybe hundreds, but maybe there are dozens of Chinese mushrooms that is used in Chinese food. But when we're here in the United States, many times they cannot be found. So then you see that some of the mushrooms are the Italian style mushrooms that are used in Chinese food as well. So some people ask me that, well, is this authentic? The zucchini. Well, people do make do with what they can. And so when Chinese immigrants came to America in the as early as 17th century, but if you think of the gold rush during the 19th century, where a lot of Chinese restaurants really established themselves, they just use whatever vegetables they can to express that, to communicate that sense of balance of yin and yang. It's not necessarily they're growing their own Chinese vegetables so that they can be that authentic. And what does, okay, so now we get to some of the naming of the foods. So what does wonton mean? Anybody already know this? I always give people a chance if they, okay. If you don't, it's all right. That knowing Chinese is not a prerequisite. So wonton is actually supposed to represent little clouds. And this clear soup base is the sky. So all the clouds are floating like the little dumplings are floating like they are floating in the clouds. So wonton, the actual word, the first one is based on 云吞 in Mandarin. Wonton is Cantonese, and then Yuntun is Mandarin. Yuntun means a swallow like you swallow or a mouthful of cloud. So when you eat it and you feel like, oh, it's slippery, that's you're eating a piece of cloud. That's what we think it is. So it's a cute idea, isn't it? So that's also why the soup cannot be a creamy, opaque soup, because then the sky isn't clear, isn't opaque, right? The sky is clear. And that's the idea of you're eating a little bit of cloud. And then chicken feet. Would you prefer eating chicken feet or phoenix claws? So that's the Chinese name for this dish, would be phoenix claws. So that you don't feel like you're just eating chicken feet, right? So these are names in which Chinese have created to make the everyday things, the mundane and the limitations that we cannot eat as much meat as we want, into a prettier existence and make life, so much better. And I share that with you today on this presentation. And I hope you enjoy your next Chinese food meal in a way that you haven't before.